Welcome back, guys. So, today I was reading two interesting articles from both Reuters and Pravda, which both were published on October 16, 2024, last week, covering President Zelensky's unveiling of his so called victory plan for Ukraine, consisting of five key points aimed at securing Western military and financial support to defeat Russia. So, here are the main elements of the so called plan. The first is going to be immediate NATO invitation. Zelensky has called for an immediate invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, which he believes would show Western courage and determination, when in reality, that would be very problematic to NATO's image, along with, securing the whole concept of freedom and democracy, as Ukraine itself is neither of those two. Yet, if they were to invite Zelensky's, proposition of Ukraine going in, that would cause Article 5 to immediately trigger, which would end basically in World War III, which no one realistically wants. The second, strengthening defense capabilities. Ukraine seeks additional weapons from Western allies, with the ability to strike deep inside Russian territory. Some details of this plan are classified and shared only with specific allies. Now, isn't that interesting? They're telling that, oh, well, we're not going to tell you the specific details of how these weapons, are going to operate and who will operate them. When it's clear it's not the Ukrainians, that's for sure, because we've known Britain and America providing satellite imageries of where those targets need to go. Not to mention, those missiles are not operated by Ukrainians, as they have not been trained to do so. So that leads me, and perhaps those who are very intelligent to look at the bigger picture here, that it's Western intelligent officers operating those missile systems, which Putin has said that is the final red line. Do not cross that. And we have seen that both America and Britain and, by extension, NATO, of course, have, refuted Zelensky's proposal for that. So take that for what you will. The third, non nuclear deterrence. Zelensky proposed the deployment of Western non nuclear military forces in Ukraine to prevent further Russian aggression after the war. This point also includes classified elements. Well, no, because Russia's not going to allow those forces to be in Ukraine, as they have stated, and the main reason why they started the special military operation 2 years ago. Not to mention, Ukraine is proving the point that a lot of military people, especially in the West, don't want to go there. As much as the, mainstream media and some uncredible YouTubers like to proclaim that they will go immediately and serve Ukraine's freedom and democracy, which is BS because it's not. But I digress. The fourth, economic measures. The plan highlights the importance of securing Ukraine's mineral resources and economic infrastructure through agreements with Western countries to prevent them from falling into Russian hands. Well, spoiler alert, too late. Russia's already taken most of the Donbass region, which, mind you, has over, what's the currency worth? Like $3.2 trillion, maybe even more, in that particular region, which is the Donbass, or rather Donetsk and Lugansk, which is something BlackRock and Vanguard have heavily invested into, which is why you can see they are increasingly paying a lot of governmental officials in the Western countries to keep prolonging this conflict, along with the military industrial complex, individuals and companies and groups, because it's all making back the money. Well, except for BlackRock and Vanguard for the land that is being reclaimed by Russia that they have spent to acquire. Now, the fifth, post-war security. Zelensky suggested that the Ukrainian forces experienced in using Western weapons could replace U.S. troops in Europe after the war, contributing to regional security. That is very laughable. That's if Ukraine is still going to be whole, which I highly doubt, and many other realistic people looking at the bigger picture here would agree upon too. They don't have the men, nor are those people that are in Ukraine going to stay for as long as they can. They're actually leaving in droves if they can by, bribing the border patrol people. And a lot of them are not willing to go and serve other Western countries if they feel that they have been betrayed and backstabbed by Western countries to use them as basically an expendable force to damage Russia as much as possible, which we're seeing that it's not working. In fact, you're basically making Russia the most hardcore trained modern military unit in the world right now. And yes, I'm saying that because the US is only learning from what it's gathering of what it's seeing. Russia is gathering what it's seeing and what it's actually doing. That is the big difference that a lot of people won't understand or grasp. So, let me tell you why these 5 key points are not realistic at all, as I kind of already did, but more into details with that, to what is actually going on the battlefield as we speak in Ukraine. So, the stalemate on the battlefield for Ukraine itself. Despite the initial advances, the Ukraine counteroffensive that was launched last year in 2023 failed to achieve the rapid breakthroughs that were anticipated by the West and a few armchair YouTubers who support Ukraine in some unrealistic capacity. Trust me, they really do have that unrealistic capacity not to think for themselves. So, Russia has already fortified its defensive positions, making significant, territorial gains in Ukraine because of it, which allows them to have more holding to then bring more troops to then advance slowly and cautiously, which Ukraine is not doing itself, unfortunately. This conflict has devolved into a slow, grinding war of attrition, and that would be correct, which Ukraine unfortunately hasn't prepared for, nor has America with its satellite imagery giving every position. However, it doesn't have the necessary military equipment nor resources to actually do a war of attrition properly. Because Russia's doing that to make small but decisive gains, as we've seen earlier this year with Avdiivka and other areas in Russia, for example. So, and I do understand that, yes, I'm aware of the Kursk offensive, and I know a lot of people are going to say, but Punditer, that happened, and look, Russia's taking land, in the south, but Ukraine is taking land in the Kursk region. I totally understand that, but it's not going to change the outcome of the war that you expect it to. Because if we fast forward now, the amount of losses Ukraine took and also the military equipment lost. And to be clear, what I mean by this, Ukraine went in to Kursk with what is to believe about 30,000 men. And of course, that has been receiving a steady flow of new troops to hold the line in Kursk and to prevent Russia from sending its resources from there to, again, the Donbass region. But as of today, Ukraine lost about 23,000 men, to be give or take on the estimates. And for what reason? For some PR offensive that has not achieved its goals, which were 2 things. One, to acquire the nuclear power plant in Kursk, which realistically they were never going to achieve because they don't have the necessary amount of men and equipment to, do what the Germans did, which would be a blitzkrieg, which realistically they did a little bit, but they met stiff resistance, which basically halted their advances. And the second was to use the PR to gain more aid, which, to be fair, they did. But in the combination of the two, they wanted to be on a better suit on the negotiation table against Russia or to have more leverage, which, again, is going to not work and has failed. The other area, exhausted resources and troop fatigue. Now, Ukraine's military is dealing with significant exhaustions. Losses in personnel and equipment have been substantial, and replenishing these resources have been slow, and will be continuously slow until it dwindles into nothing. While the international military aid has been crucial to Ukraine, it hasn't been enough to provide Ukraine with a decisive advantage on the battlefield, nor will it ever. And trust me on that, it will never. The Ukrainian side is basically already stretched increasingly thin as it is, since those who are actually realistic and looking at the bigger picture here can actually see it, making a quick victory over Russia very, very highly unrealistic to those who look, again, what's going on the battle maps of Ukraine. And this is the third area, dependence on Western aid. Ukraine is heavily reliant on Western financial, humanitarian, and military support, though the question is going to be how long. Because, however, the fatigue is already setting in amongst its allies, very hard, might I say, especially with rising domestic pressures in countries like the US and European Union nation states, where even myself, I have questioned to whom is our tax dollars actually going to in Ukraine? Some countries are really questioning the long term sustainability of providing aid now, more so than others who are still very unrealistic about their goals and achievements for Ukraine through the aid. If this aid actually falters, which it would, or decreases by the end of 2024, especially to see who wins in this 2024 November US presidential election, then Ukraine will struggle to maintain its current operations and holdings in the territories, let alone push for the so called decisive victory over Russia, which realistically, again, will never happen. The fourth, Russian adaptation in this conflict. Russia has adapted its military strategy after initial failures early in the invasion, as we have seen. While it still faces logistical issues, its forces have actually been able to regroup and solidify their defensive positions, which makes it difficult for Ukraine to make any meaningful advances. Furthermore, Russia has shown resilience, utilizing its vast resources of manpower and resources to prolong this conflict, by also creating new, cheap, and creative ways to counteract Ukrainian tactics, such as using FPV drones, which both sides, to be fair, are on equal footing on that and have basically made turtle tanks on both sides with barns and meshes and all that stuff. However, there's two areas that Russia is superseding Ukraine and the Western military technological equipment area, which would be one, hypersonic missiles, which the West does not have, nor Ukraine could replicate or reproduce. The other is the fabs, which is basically, there's 500 kilos, there is, what is that, 1,500 kilos, 3,000 kilos, etc., of just basically big bombs, but they just made glides on both sides. So when they drop it, it rotates and just glides to the targets necessary where they need to, obviously land, which Ukraine has not been able to also replicate, nor conduct, nor do. Just because of the surface air missiles that Russia has would make it very difficult for those F-16s that have been, so-called the wonder weapons to save Ukraine, cannot actually, execute. The fifth, geopolitical shifts. Diplomatic negotiations have yet to offer any breakthrough, and there's little signs of major concessions from Russia. Additionally, global geopolitical events such as conflicts in other regions or economic shifts, like the BRICS economic bloc rising, which, not to mention with the global south actually also trying to go in to the BRICS system and also gaining more Russian resources. So, this is going to further deviate the international attention and support away from Ukraine, as now you have the EU and also the US dollar right now in basically, how would you say, in a competition to see which one will be obviously ahead. Not to mention, you also have the multipolar world developing because of such conflicts in Ukraine, which is what we're seeing, especially through BRICS itself. Sixth, the public opinion in Ukraine. While the public support for the war in there remains strong in Ukraine, the strain of the prolonged conflict is wearing down the population as it is. And I've met a few who are very, I wouldn't say dissatisfied, but very disappointed, but they still support Ukraine, but deep down they know they're not going to win. Because this could eventually erode morale or force the Ukrainian government to reconsider its goals, which realistically that's what's going to happen, unfortunately for them. And they're learning the hard way from that, especially if the war drags on with no clear path to victory, as we're already seeing in Ukraine and in the West itself. So that is something that all of those 6 points is going to counteract the main 5 points from that article, or both of those articles to be clear, that are illustrating, Ukraine's, or rather President Zelensky's so-called miracle victory plan, which even the West, some of their military heads and politicians and diplomats were kind of shaking and, dare I say, perhaps, snickering in the background, saying, yeah, okay, sure, rolling their eyes. So sorry to those Ukrainians who expect some miracle development with such a, plan or a piece of paper. That's not really going to happen. So to basically summarize, or rather conclude on all this, Zelensky's plan emphasizes the importance of Western support and warns the globe about the consequences of a Russian victory, which I don't really think there's going to be such a consequence because besides the EU wasting so much money and NATO's image being tarnished, though I don't still think it's going to dissolve, maybe in a decade or two, but definitely it's going to take a punch because of this, and not in a good way. However, the plan has faced criticism for placing too much responsibility on Western allies, and that is 100% true, without addressing internal issues like corruption or military reform within Ukraine itself that will never happen anytime soon. And that is basically the truth of the gist. that they're not going to tell you. They're going to say, oh, everything is fine behind the scenes when it's not. Because again, it realistically is not. So, yeah, other than that, if you can please leave a like and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. And stay tuned for more videos covering the geopolitical sphere and perhaps even current news. Otherwise, take care, guys. Have a good day.